And share screen. This one. Today we are still in Hong Kong, and we will look at Hong Kong's economy. I will present some people's view first, and then we'll come to my own view about the Hong Kong economy, how Hong Kong becomes what it is today. So a little bit of recap.
In this series, we'll be looking at countries and regions around the world to provide a short breakdown of their economies and other key facts. In this video, we'll be taking a look at one of the most important financial centers in the world. This is Economic Fact Files, Hong Kong. Officially known as the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China, Hong Kong is situated at the mouth of the Pearl River Delta on the coast of southern China. This location is part of the reason that the region has become such an important center of international trade, thanks to its position as a gateway between the East and the West. Hong Kong is officially part of China, although it is considered to be separate and operates to a certain extent as an independent country. It has its own government, currency, and economic systems, which are all separate from China. The government in Hong Kong tries to keep the region business-friendly, with no restrictions or barriers when it comes to foreign business and no restrictions on capital flows. As you would imagine, this has helped the region to prosper. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit's Worldwide Cost of Living Survey, Hong Kong is one of the richest cities in the world and also one of the most expensive. Let's take a look at some of the economic factors that contribute to this. In 2018, Hong Kong's GDP was over $360 billion US, giving a real GDP growth rate of 3%. This gives a GDP per capita of almost $49,000 US. Hong Kong has an export-oriented economy, with its main international trading partners being China, the US, the UK, Japan, and Taiwan. Its most valuable exports are in the category of electronic circuits and microassemblies, which account for over 20% of the total, followed by mobile phones at over 13%. The financial sector is a huge earner for the region, contributing around 18% to the overall GDP of Hong Kong and employing around 7% of the workforce. The Global Financial Centers Index ranks Hong Kong as third in terms of the world's leading financial centers, coming behind New York and London, respectively. According to figures in 2016, Hong Kong is also the fourth largest forex market in the world, and in 2018, it had the fifth largest stock market in the world. The largest stocks include Tencent, ICBC, and PetroChina. Some of the reasons for Hong Kong's importance as a financial center include its location, its well-regulated markets and transparency, the fact that it has the benefits of being part of China but also being separate, and the Hong Kong dollar being pegged with the US dollar. It should also be mentioned that Hong Kong has a unique situation due to its history as a British colony. It was while under British rule that it became a centre for international trade. However, in 1997, Britain handed the city over to China to begin the one country, two systems approach. Hong Kong is known for its skyscrapers, with more than any other city in the world, even trumping New York with almost double the number. Unsurprisingly, with this in mind, Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated places in the world, with a population of over 7.4 million people living in 426 square miles. At the time of releasing this video, the unemployment rate stands at an extremely low level of 2.8%. Over 50% of this labour force works in the services sector, and nearly 20% in manufacturing. According to the 2019 Index of Economic Freedom by the Heritage Foundation, Hong Kong gained an overall score of 90.2 out of 100, which means it is ranked as the world's freest economy. This is Hong Kong's 25th year in a row of getting top spot. The ranking is made up of scores for 12 different factors under the categories of rule of law, regulatory efficiency, government size, and open markets. In the report, it said, moderately looser fiscal policy encouraged economic growth in 2018, but US-China trade frictions could have significant negative repercussions. An exceptionally competitive financial and business hub, Hong Kong remains one of the world's most resilient economies. A high-quality legal framework provides effective protection of property rights and strongly supports the rule of law. There is little tolerance for corruption, and a high degree of transparency enhances government integrity. Regulatory efficiency and openness to global commerce undergird a vibrant entrepreneurial climate. And I think we will end on that note. Hong Kong is a very impressive city and a critical part of the global financial system. However, particularly in Western countries, it is much less known than some of the other bustling financial centers in the world. Hopefully, this short economic fact file sheds some light on this important region. And if you like this video and would like to see more...
Okay, there's always a but.
Albert.
Yep. Okay, let me stop it first.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, look, when I think I'm quoting you correctly, when you showed the British-based video a couple of weeks ago, and you said that you would be showing a Chinese video, which obviously you've just shown, you suggested that the British video was biased and this one was more to the point. I have to disagree completely. I think it's the other way around. This video does not mention the history of Hong Kong, and therefore there is an implication that it has always been a region of China. I really think that
well, you haven't saw the next video.
Sorry?
That was the recap.
What do you mean?
The Chinese video coming soon.
Well, I don't think we've seen this one before. Where does
yeah, well, because today I show you, I think 3 videos. So you have only seen one. So let's finish the other 2 and then you will know what I mean last time. Okay?
One further comment on that one. It mentions that Hong Kong has one of the highest costs of living. I would say that is, again, not right. People go to Hong Kong to buy all sorts of things because it has a lower cost of living.
No, it depends. Now, if you live in Hong Kong and you know the rates around, it's not expensive. But if you are just Hong Kong expensive in terms of the rent, the houses.
All right.
So if you are not there, you won't feel that. But the people in Hong Kong really feel. I would say it this way: the 7 million people in Hong Kong are working for a few real estate tycoons. They are all
restaurants. When I was in Hong Kong, restaurants were a fraction of the cost of similar Hong Kong restaurants in Melbourne.
Yep.
And of course, many people, not me, but many people will go and buy their clothing in Hong Kong.
Yep. It is a shopping center for the world because tax-free.
Yes.
Okay, but anyway, let me continue with
Anyway,
the...
I've had my say.
Okay.
Have a date.
The idea that China is going to end up like a Western-style society is a nonsense. China will remain China. Now, there is a view in Hong Kong that Hong Kong did well in the period before 1997 because it was smart, because it was clever, because it was free, because it could get on with it, because it was with the British and so on. Now, I think that for the great part, this is a serious misinterpretation of history. Hong Kong did well between the late 1970s and the handover in 1997 because it got lucky. What do I mean by that? It got lucky because China in 1978 started to open up bit by bit, step by step. It didn't open up fully until after the WTO agreement in 2001. So while it was still opening up in a piecemeal fashion, Hong Kong could take on some of the functions that otherwise China would have done. It would have like the front office in some senses for China. And so Hong Kong was the beneficiary of being able to do these things. One of these things, of course, was that if you were a Western firm, a European firm, an American firm, a Japanese firm, a Korean firm, and you wanted to access the Chinese market, the easiest stopping point initially was to do it from Hong Kong. So it wasn't that they were very smart, it was that they got lucky. They got lucky not because of the British, they got lucky because of China and the role that China was performing. Now, of course, after WTO, then China increasingly, I mean, if you wanted to open up in the Chinese market, why would you go to Hong Kong? It became irrelevant. If you want to open up in the Chinese market, go to Shanghai, or go to Beijing, or go to Guangzhou, or go to Shenzhen, wherever you wanted to go. But you wouldn't, by and large, choose to stay in Hong Kong. So the raison d'etre, the cause of Hong Kong's relative success in that period, disappeared. And Hong Kong had to find a new role in the period after 1997. So it wasn't China's fault that this happened. This was a change of circumstances in the relationship between China and Hong Kong. Now, another reason that the period since 1997 has been criticised, particularly by the British, the former governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten, would say, China's not been true to democracy and so on. Now, this, in my view, this is British hypocrisy. Britain ran Hong Kong for 155 years. And I'll tell you something, there was never a semblance of democracy. Did they ever introduce universal suffrage? Did they ever talk about universal suffrage? Not a word of it until after the handover agreement, and then with Chinese rule looming, then it became essential that Hong Kong was democratic in a Western style fashion. This was hypocrisy. How should Hong Kong try and proceed now? Now, I think a word of criticism here of the Chinese government and its handling of Hong Kong. I think that one country, two systems, which was a brilliant solution to the problem of Hong Kong, a civilization state solution to the problem. A nation state would never think of those terms in those terms. But what is one country, two systems? How do you create the balance between the two? The project in the longer run is clearly to create a more unified country. It's not to just keep the two places entirely separate. And I think one of the difficulties that China has had is that initially its reaction to the handover. Remember, this is 1997. This is China just turning outwards into the world. There was a lot of publicity questioning about how China will conduct itself as the force behind Hong Kong and so on. And so I think that China's natural instinct in that period, an understandable instinct, was to emphasize two systems. I mean, I remember when I lived in Hong Kong for 2.5 years, soon after the handover, and I remember being surprised that the only evidence, virtually, of any Chinese presence, visible presence in Hong Kong, was one Chinese flag flying over one of the buildings near the harbour. There was just no evidence. Essentially, there was not much change. It just carried on in the old form. And there were two big problems with this. One, the governance of Hong Kong is a colonial governance. It's set up in a colonial manner. It's a kind of executive. There's no political leadership. There's no political sense of direction set by a colonial administration, because that's not the job of a colonial administration. That would have been done back in London in those days. But basically, the form of government has stayed more or less the same as it was previously. And the second problem is about the economy. Now, contrary to the way in which the British have historically liked to talk about Hong Kong as this dynamic, competitive economy, by and large, that is just rubbish. Hong Kong is a typical colonial economy. It is not a competitive economy. It's a monopolistic economy. It basically preferred or empowered the tycoons to run Hong Kong, to divide up the spoils between themselves, above all in the field of property where most of the money was made. So this is an oligopolistic and monopolistic economy. That had to be changed. That has to be changed. But unfortunately, not nearly enough change has taken place. So my criticism of the Chinese government, it needs to break the situation in Hong Kong, to allow Hong Kong to go forward. It needs to change those two situations, to have a different sort of administration and to have a different kind of economy, which is more open. Now, let me finish by saying, compare the fortunes of Hong Kong with Shenzhen. Deng Xiaoping deliberately suggested the idea of Shenzhen just over the border, a little fishing port, so it was close to Hong Kong and could model itself and learn some of Hong Kong's lessons. Now compare the situation of Hong Kong today with where Shenzhen today. Shenzhen has made absolutely electrifying progress. It is the technological center probably of China. It is the second only to Silicon Valley in its technical competence and innovation. And Hong Kong? There's nothing like that in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has made zero, they talked about it, but it made zero progress in this direction. I think that the Hong Kong people should press the Chinese government for more rapid integration in China's own plans. So that Hong Kong, rather than just thinking of itself as apart from China, it needs to think of itself more in terms of being part of China. The mentality of the people is, we're different, we're not Chinese. Well, of course, for 155 years, they never learned anything about China. They speak Cantonese, sure, but they didn't know anything really about China. They were ignorant about the North. Their lines of vision were all westwards to Britain or the West or the United States later or Canada, etc., and never north to China.
Okay, now discussion. That's what I meant by the more Chinese version of it.
That's very Who was that bloke?
Jack, Martin Jack.
What position?
He is a British.
Oh.
He comes from Cambridge, I think.
Oh.
Yes.
I think
was that recorded before the demonstrations in Hong Kong? I presume it was.
Sorry?
No.
No,
it was recorded before the demonstrations.
I don't know.
I don't know
when
last year.
I don't know when
it seems
was.
To be.
Yeah, but anyway, let me put in my other few words about the how Hong Kong developed into the current state. My view is different from both of them. Okay, a little bit different. Hong Kong started off being a British colony during the Opium War, the first Opium War. That is from history. And British used Hong Kong as an opium port. Now, before that, the main port of importing opium is actually on the other side of the Pearl River, which is Macau. But since the British want to get a handle on the opium trade, so they fought the war and then get this Hong Kong as their colony, and therefore Hong Kong has been a major income economy comes from trading of opium. After the Second World War, so that was a long time after that. After the Second World War, the China changed to red, being communist. So a lot of rich people, especially those from Shanghai, moved to Hong Kong. And especially that's why there's a bank called the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. Why? Because these were the bank coming from Shanghai and then migrated to Hong Kong and set its foot on Hong Kong. These people bring a lot of money, technologies, and skills in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong started becoming a manufacturing center. At those times, Hong Kong main manufacturing is textile, plastics, and so forth. And when I was young, well, we make the plastic flowers. So almost every family in Hong Kong, especially those poor, will take some of those petals, stems, etc. from factory, and then we assemble it into the flower and then send it back to the factory and to earn a bit of money. So this is how Hong Kong becomes initially for the first 10 or 20 years after the Second World War. Now at those times, China was blockaded by the West. So basically, China cannot trade with the rest of the world, except through Hong Kong. So Hong Kong becomes a export conduit for the whole China. And therefore, the Hong Kong's transportation developed rapidly. Hong Kong's container ports was one of the largest container ports in the world. I think it was number 3 after Amsterdam and Singapore. Right. Then it becomes second and become first, and then it has been competing with Singapore between the number 1 and number 2. Now even today, 2020. Hong Kong is the second largest trading partner of China after United States. How can that be? 7 million people. Is the second largest trading partner of United States because there are still a lot of goods going through Hong Kong. And of course, Hong Kong also serves another purpose for China because a lot of required technologies and techniques and thinking method, etc., go into China through Hong Kong. Hong Kong is able, so Hong Kong has been an input and output for China. But when China joined the WTO in 2001, China started to export directly out of Shanghai and the rest. Hong Kong's role of being the intermediate loses its position. When Hong Kong returned to China, the first chief executive is from a shipping company. His family is one of the largest ship owners in China. He had the vision that we change Hong Kong into a technology center. So he proposed the idea of having a electronic development center, a biological technology center, and so forth. Unfortunately, people in Hong Kong choose to change that project into a real estate project rather than an innovation project. And Hong Kong has been declining since. Not that Hong Kong is really declining. The Hong Kong's GDP growth has been about 3 to 4% after the hangover, after 1997. Unfortunately, Chinese GDP has been increasing in double digits. So eventually, China takes over. The Hong Kong people is now suffering from this inferiority complex. They were rich. They think they are smart. They make a lot of money. But now look at the little city next to Hong Kong. It used to be a fishing village. Now it is bigger than Hong Kong. Yes, regular residents of about 20 million, whereas Hong Kong is 7 million, 7.5. So it's about 3 times larger. And the high-rise building, the number of high-rise buildings in Shenzhen has now exceeded those in Hong Kong. The tallest building in that region is in Shenzhen, not in Hong Kong. So there's a lot of problem like that. But Martin Jack is correct in that the Hong Kong government is a colonial government. It does not have political directions. It doesn't understand politics. And the British put a lot of minds into the system in Hong Kong. And that's why we come up with all this problem in the last few years. Hong Kong had, after handover from 1997 until 2014, there were no protests, no major protests. The first major protest occurs in 2014, the Occupy Central. I think some of you might recall. Why? We have to look back a few years before 2014. By 2010, Chinese economy measured is number 3. By 2011, Chinese economy becomes number 2. At the end of 2012, Obama with Hillary Clinton suggest the return of the U.S. refocus into Pacific and putting China as the major adversaries. Therefore, problems started in Hong Kong because all these the spies in Hong Kong started pushing the people in Hong Kong around, and then come up with this protest in the last year as well as in the Occupy Central. So for a real understanding of the situation in Hong Kong, we need to understand the economic development as well as the history. So that's why I take all this time to cover all these aspects, and then next week we will deal with the current protests. Okay, open the question. Anyone? Albert, you start first. You always a question.
Sam's got his hand up.
Okay, Sam got his hand up. Okay, Sam?
Just only adding some more, that during the communists were independent, and a lot of people doesn't believe his own, because at the time still very poor, and a lot of rich people, they have to escape from the mainland China, and the only one place is only the Hong Kong, which maybe some other Southeast Asia people. So that's why they create Hong Kong into the big city at the time. And the last one, which is British government, which have been done not only in Hong Kong, it's also in the India, in the Malaysia. They always are doing that kind of a separation policy to colonize the people. Even they are not colonized, even they are withdrawn already. Just like Singapore, by the time when the Japanese army coming down, none of a British army staying there. They escaped. By the time when the Japanese
surrendered,
surrounded,
they come.
Suddenly next day they coming everything. So they want to control back.
Wow.
And it's the same as some other country. That's why.
The British are very good politicians.
Yeah, that's just like the problem of Kashmir and all this everything.
Yeah.
And recently, maybe you can add it up again, that British also as well, the MI7, and then the CI or so-called the SP1. How many Hong Kong people they have been training for the more than 2.5 years, and more than 2,000 citizens in the UK as well as in the USA, and those people after 2 years they go back, and that is the reason of the riot. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can comment on what you've been saying, the old adage is that the British have controlled their empire through divide and rule. Now, I have a joke. Sam's.
He will be listening. He just walked.
Yeah. Here he is. Yeah. It's interesting. The three major examples of divide and rule are all IPs. India and Pakistan, IP. Israel and Palestine, IP. Ireland and Protestants, IP.
And me as well.
Me?
IP.
IP.
Yeah. This is a old tactic. Everybody knows about divide and conquer, divide and rule, and divide and conquer. And unfortunately, a lot of people fall into the same tactic. Because I think one very interesting thing is that once China has determined that Hong Kong is going back to China, it has a special branch in the police which deal with political information, intelligence, and so forth, is dissolved. So all those officers in that branch are all granted British citizenship, and they left Hong Kong. So when Hong Kong is handed over back, it has no political intelligence unit whatsoever. So that's number one. The other number two is, in the U.S. Embassy in Hong Kong, it has over 1,000 employees, larger than those in Beijing. Why? Because Hong Kong is spy heaven. Even 007 go to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong do have quite a bit of problem to deal with. Okay, any other questions?
Well, if I can just make comment on or go back to what I was saying earlier. Because Hong Kong started itself as a fishing village, and as a major centre, it was always either British or recently Chinese. There is no real concept there of divide and rule, as we were talking about before. I would say the nearest comparison to Hong Kong, and I'd be interested in what you say about this, Albert, the nearest comparison is Gibraltar, because they're both large British colonies, or large population-wise, small geographically, and they both became British colonies because of their geographical position.
Well, Gibraltar is still a very troubled place at the moment.
Yes.
So because sometimes it's geography dictates your situation. If Hong Kong is not near the mouth of Pearl Harbor, and if it's not opposite to Macau, the British might not want to pick Hong Kong.
Yeah, and exactly the same in Gibraltar. The Spaniards want Gibraltar back. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the situation, I think history is driven by geography a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
So Hong Kong history is all about its geography. And so Hong Kong people need to understand it is geography which will also determine their future. They are part of Hong Kong, part of China. Unless they recognize that point, they are not going to move forward very fast. They need to move forward by, as Martin Jacks hinted, we think Hong Kong as part of China, integrate with China. Yes, Mary?
Does anyone know what's I don't know what the immigration levels are from China these days, but does anyone know whether more people coming from Hong Kong in the same in reaction to, as Albert said, the identity problem? Now they're not nearly so important to China or whatever, and whether that's actually driving any increase in the immigration from Hong Kong to places like
lately there have been increased immigrations flowing out from Hong Kong. A lot of people are trying to get out from Hong Kong because life there in Hong Kong is getting worse rather than getting better in the last year and so. So those capable will be thinking why I need to stick to here, why I can't go to somewhere else better. But in terms of migration into Hong Kong, so there is a steady flow of 250 Persians per day from mainland China into Hong Kong. 250. Yeah, not much, but it accumulates up to a few millions now. So we have about 2 to 3 millions Chinese move into China and move to Hong Kong. Probably since that was before the handover. It was under the British rule that process started around early 1990s. In the early 1990s, the British and the Chinese government make an agreement for families reunion in Hong Kong. So they allowed initially 160 Persian per day, but I think it's increased to about 250, and it has been keeping at that number. So initially people say, oh, only 160, not much, but the numbers add up. So there is about 1 or 2 million people who in Hong Kong who came to Hong Kong within the last 20 years. So put it that way. There's about 1 or 2 million first generation Hong Kong migrants. But of course, Hong Kong also have a lot of people migrating out. So if you go to almost any city in the West, in the rest of the world, okay, there is a Chinatown.
Yes.
In the Chinatown, before, let's say, 20 years ago, they speak Cantonese mostly. But nowadays, of course, Chinatown speak Mandarin.
Oh,
But-
yeah, really?
Yeah. More and more people speaking Mandarin in Chinatown today. But before that, say 20 years ago, for example, when I go to Box Hill, where I do a shopping, we are
Yes.
greeted in Cantonese. But today, we are greeted in Mandarin.
But-
Although they should recognize me being there 20 years ago, but the new shopkeepers, the new tailors, they don't. But of course, for the old guys working there, they will talk to us in Cantonese. But for the other newer shopkeepers, they always greet you in Mandarin as a first choice.
Albert, I don't know whether Melbourne is unique in what I'm about to say or not, but the Chinatown has moved. When I was growing up, Chinatown was Little Bourke Street.
Yeah.
Then Footscray became the main region for the Chinese. Now, as you correctly say, it's either Box Hill or Springvale.
Wow.
So, is that unique to Melbourne? That
No,
that
it's not unique.
China- It's not.
It's
Right.
not unique. Just
Right.
I think there are now two reasons why they are shifting. One is Chinatown is a magnet for food, and
Yeah,
therefore it is
absolutely.
also a magnet for crime.
Crime, drugs.
Yeah, and gambling is part of the Chinese migrants outside the world. And so if you work hard, Chinese work hard, and if you don't gamble, they will have a good life. But if they gamble, then they will stuck to that level and never get out. And that's the problem with a lot of people in Chinatown. So for those who is able to bring up a family, their second generation is usually middle class. And by the third generation, they will make a fortune. But if they can't, they will still stuck there and then still speaking Mandarin, washing dishes. So Chinatown, you can now, for example, I think the couple of years ago, the mayor of Melbourne is a Chinese,
Yes.
John Shou.
Yes. Yes.
He is a restaurant owner. I think it's called the Golden Dragon. The Golden Dragon restaurant.
Mhm.
And of course, that restaurant has changed hand out. It is no longer a Cantonese restaurant. I think John Shou speaks Cantonese.
Mhm.
Right.
But I haven't met him.
What's the situation going to be like before we finish up if the US imposes sanctions on Hong Kong because it's trying to generate a bit of a war with China to take attention off problems they have in the US?
Well,
What's going to
I don't
happen
think the US will really put on sanctions on Hong Kong. The reason is Hong Kong is one of the few places where US has a trade surplus rather than trade deficit. That means a lot of companies in Hong Kong will benefit from the current special economic region of Hong Kong. So I think they can do the threat, but they won't do it. The real threat to the Hong Kong is the Hong Kong Democratic and Freedom Act, which passed last year. They can apply sanctions on the officials who agree with the Chinese rule.
Mhm.
So some of those Hong Kong government servants who have a passport in US, for example, might be blocked from going to US, and then their access frozen in US. That will, I think that will happen. But for the trading position, I don't, because the US companies have too much interest in Hong Kong. If they are going to make it into something like that, the companies will complain. But again, Donald Trump, we can never guess what it will do.
Very worrying, because
Yeah.
he needs a lot of distractions, and he's got a red button he can always push.
He need to take his medicine.
I mean, we've come to a stage in the world when Bannon looks like he's a good guy.
Yeah.
What? We're getting away from China and Hong Kong.
Yeah, well-
It was a question about Hong Kong, actually. Albert.
Hong Kong's problem is US-China problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
It
was
is-
going to say
Target.
what Trump said yesterday was one of the most incredible things I've ever heard, where he said that the answer to
COVID-19.
coronavirus and the increasing numbers of people with the virus in America was to stop testing.
Yep.
Well, he's right. You won't know they're there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He's right.
He is
And
right.
despite the fact that
What he said's right.
he later said it was a joke, I have no doubt that he said it quite
He
seriously.
said it before.
Yep.
Yeah.
He meant that, but
Yes, absolutely.
and
Yeah,
later on he retracted.
Yeah, he's never been a joking person.
No.
No.
Yeah, no.
Everything he's said is to get a headline and keep Biden out of the
But he is a joke.
Yes.
Well, he's not a joke. He's a very dangerous person who works for some very, very dangerous people.
Yes.
He's the mouthpiece for some very dangerous people. And when John Bannon looks like he's a hero, you got a problem. You got a big problem. Because this man wants a third world war to cut the population down. And he's written books on such a thing. And he's looking like a good guy.
That's why we said
The
I
biggest-
said he need to take his medicine.
The
I
biggest
wish he'd
problem
catch the
with
virus.
Trump, okay, Trump won't be around forever, but the problem with Trump is
Damage will
the
be.
precedents that he's set.
Yes. He's lowered the standards so much.
Absolutely, yes.
He is anti-Darwinian.
Anti-which?
Darwin, anti-Darwin,
Oh,
anti-evolution.
Andy Cohen, yeah. I've wondered how many people have thought of taking him out. Not that you get around his security detail, but there'd be some thought processes going on, I would think.
Give him the virus.
No. With the bazooka.
No, give him the virus.
Well, his remark about testing is, I think, will be staying with us for a long time.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, anyway, thank you very much. And
Thank you, Albert.
Well, thank you, Albert.
Thank you. We will see you next
Now
week.
It's
you
the
well now?
holidays
Your
next week,
eyebrows
Albert.
Holiday next
Albert,
week?
Are your
yes, we've got
eyebrows
2
okay?
weeks. We've got 2 weeks of holidays. The first 2 weeks of July are holidays. We start back on the 13th. You on the 14th.
Okay.
14th of July.
Okay, 2 weeks off, and then when we come back, I will continue to talk
14th.
about Hong Kong. But that will be the last
Yeah.
talk about Hong Kong, and then we will move on to something else because there's
Look,
a lot other things to talk
I
about.
don't know how other people feel because we're doing this via Zoom. I'm quite comfortable to meet over the next 2 weeks.
So am I, but Albert might want a break.
Yeah, he might want a break. I'm having a break. I won't be there, Albert, if you do it.
Fair enough. Fair
Okay,
enough.
so
I
we will
will
have a
always
break.
come.
We will have a break for 2 weeks, and then we will come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
other Albert.
Mr. Albert to have a rest.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
But
Albert.
can I just,
Albert. Thank you.
yeah,
We
Just
cannot
say
occupy the
thank you,
all the
Albert.
time.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Albert, your predictions were right. You said once Taiwanese elections were over, the demonstrations would stop in Hong Kong. And yes, they did.
Albert,
So
did you get
prediction right?
did you get that video from Joe Demko back 3 or 4 weeks ago?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let him know. He wondered.
Okay. Thank you.
And Albert, how's your eyebrow? You healed up now?
Yep, healed up
All
now.
right.
Yeah. 3 stitches. It's done.
All right.
Okay.
We
Okay,
won't
take care.
ask, we
Take
won't
care.
ask whether you were sober or otherwise. We'll
I'm
Okay.
still sober now.
well of you.
Okay. See you all in 2 weeks' time.
Okay. See you all.
Good on you, Albert, and
Okay.
look after yourself.
Everybody look after yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Break, Albert.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.